Greetings viewers, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are back looking at my new 2013 Subaru BRZ Premium project car. In today's video we're finally going to do our bumper to bumper mechanical inspection, look at everything wrong with the car front to back, detail it as we've done on many cars before, see how this car has held up to the last decade and last 112,000 miles, see what it's going to cost to get it 100% mechanically sound, and we're going to talk about what I paid for it and the breakdown on that. With that said, let's go ahead and jump into this inspection. So guys, we talked about a lot of the cosmetic things. We talked about the history of the car. We talked about the front end collision it had. We talked about the rear end collision it had. We talked about the condition of the tires. We looked at scratches, dents, dings, all that good stuff. In the initial video, I'll link that up here in the corner if you want to go check that out. So we're not going to go back over all that stuff. So in this video, again, we are focused on mechanical issues, engine, transmission, suspension, steering, etc., front and back. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So as we talked about in the first video, the engine has been replaced with a salvage yard engine, as we can see evident here from the numbers written on the intake manifold. Now, the reason why the engine was replaced was not because Subarus were unreliable and because it was a failure, it's just because it was poorly taken care of, poorly maintained, and ran low on oil and spun a rod bearing, which is going to happen to any vehicle that is ran with a low amount of engine oil in it. It's not a Subaru design flaw, it's just the poor thing just didn't get the proper care it needed. So looking over the engine, as I said in that first video, according to the guy I purchased the car from, it had about 75,000 miles on it when it was transplanted into this car. So fairly low mileage engine, and again, a fairly low mileage car with 112,000 miles on a 2013. So the obvious things that I pointed out in the last video, like this swollen upper radiator hose that has this worm gear clamp on it, that needs to be replaced. The small radiator hose here from the radiator to the cap assembly looks to be okay, but also, you know, this thing is 10 years old, so hoses, things of that nature, do have a life cycle. The bottom one looks fine. It's not swollen. Basically, this is the only one that actually looks bad. But again, due to age, it'd probably be good to go ahead and replace all of the hoses in the cooling system while we have it drained out. Probably good to go ahead and throw a thermostat in it as well. Looking back here at the heater hose, at the firewall, again, we've got a worm gear clamp here because apparently it did not want to seal back up with the factory spring clamp when they swapped the engine. So heater hose probably needs to go ahead and be replaced as well. Just at Subaru earlier, I did buy a new serpentine belt for the car. I actually have it, as this serpentine belt is pretty ragged. If we look at the grooves are getting pretty deep, and there is a little bit of cracking in there, and it just a little bit of glaze on the back of the belt. Obviously an older belt, so should go ahead and replace that now before it breaks and leaves us stranded somewhere. Have not pulled off the inlet here, but likely the throttle body needs to be cleaned. While I was at Subaru, I also picked up a new PCV valve, which we will be replacing in a future video. And I got the PCV hose on order. They didn't have it in stock, but I should have it by the end of the week when plan to film the rest of this video on this little knick-knack stuff, replacing the belt, replacing the cabin air filter, the PCV valve. Probably going to go ahead and do the rear differential gear oil and just some of that kind of maintenance stuff to get caught up. And we're probably going to go ahead and change the engine oil and filter, just because I don't know what this guy put in this car, just because it looks like he threw an engine in it and then resold it. So probably not the best oil. We got a nameless oil filter on it. I grabbed a couple of the 130 black Tokyo Roki Subaru Japan filters while I was at the dealership for the BRZ as well. Other than that, don't really see any other issues. Top side here, there is some oil on the front timing cover, but as I talked about before, normally when it's located around here, it's just due to people spilling oil when doing oil changes or adding oil and just not cleaning it up. And, dirt and stuff, debris gets stuck to that. We look at the rest of the timing chain cover, It's basically clean. There's not really any seepage of oil, anything like that. But we're going to get underneath, take the skid plate down, and look at the underside of the engine, and look at the steering and suspension components. All right, so the engine and transmission skid plates, although that's not really a skid plate, it's more of an under tray or out of the way. One big annoying thing I've been having happen with the BRZ is an annoying rattling from the exhaust manifold contacting this aluminum skid plate, as you can see from the rubbing evidence here and here. And I think Mr. 56-ounce snap-on dead blow will help me massage that a little bit to get rid of that annoying rattling noise. So currently under the engine of the BRZ, it is quite cramped under here still, even with it lifted and on jack stands. There's a little bit of oil there on the driver's side of the timing cover cylinder head, but again, looks like a lot of it is just where people have been careless and spilled oil and it's ran down the engine. Looks like our cam carriers and our cam covers are still dry, no leakage there. Nothing external at the head gaskets, but really isn't an issue here on the F-Series engine. Engine mounts look good. Oil pan has a little bit of seepage there at the drain plug, but looks like they changed the oil and didn't put a crush washer in there, so to be expected. Nothing really out of the ordinary under here. Everything looks really good. We do have that evidence there on the heat shields where the exhaust manifold has been rubbing and rattling on that skid plate. Looking at the back side here, I've already looked at the tie rod ends, inner and outer. There's no play there. Neither of our ball joint boots are torn or showing any issues, and our control arm bushings are in good condition. One weird thing about the BRZ is they've got a stamped steel control arm instead of a cast one or a tubular one, and they're basically similar to the newer Subarus, except they're backwards essentially. The big round bushing is normally at the back on the newer Subarus, and the small bushing there is normally to the front. So a little bit of backwards stuff going on there. No real movement in the end links or the sway bar in the front. Again, as I said, no movement in the inner or outer tie rod, just had it aligned, so all was good there in the steering and suspension. And our front brakes are nearly new. Brake pads are nearly new. Rotors are in really good shape. So moving back under the car, not really seeing any big issues jumping out at me. The transmission's nice and dry, no real leaks, nothing to report there. There is a little bit of a dent there in the heat shield for the catalytic converter, but this is a very low car, so to be expected to dent some stuff up. Now, one thing that's a little perplexing is there's a little bit of something going on here, over here, and back there, and I'm not exactly sure where it's coming from. Perhaps it was oil leaks from the old engine that as the car went down the road, they were collecting in these holes down the frame rail. I'm not exactly sure. But nothing around is evident. Now, there is a little bit of some buildup around the tail housing here of the transmission, so maybe the output shaft seal maybe is leaking a little bit, but it's not wet, and there's not really evidence of that. And there's also some buildup here around the center support bearing, but nothing really looks wet around it. It's just kind of on the sides here, so not sure what's up with that. No big issues, rust, etc. in the exhaust system, but likely going to be replacing that with a Performance exhaust system. And this 6-speed automatic, I could have swore was an Aisin unit or a Toyota transmission, but it does have a Subaru casting there in the housing, so we'll have to do a little bit more digging on that. So moving all the way back to the back of the car, not seeing any other issues. Our rear CV axles, well, our CV axles, since we don't have front CV axles in a BRZ, are in good shape. No tears in the boots, no issues. Everything looks to be in good shape. When we did the rear wheel bearing, brand new brake pads on the rear, new brakes, basically all the way around on this car. Not seeing any leakage from our struts, but they are factory struts, both front and rear, so likely past due for a replacement. As you want to replace your struts every 30 to 60,000 miles, depending on the manufacturer's recommendations. All of our control arm bushings look to be in good shape. No dry rotting, no tearing in any of these lateral links or control arms, etc. No movement in our ball joint here, our tie rod. I'm assuming we're going to call that a ball joint rather than a tie rod, even though it is kind of a rear toe rod, but no issues there. Probably going to go ahead and change the rear diff gear oil very soon. Our rear differential bushings in good condition. Looks like we have had a segment of the exhaust system cut out and welded back in, as we see that shoddy looking weld job there and that one there, and we also see some corrosion and possibly an exhaust leak. I believe I've heard an exhaust leak, and looks like that's where it's coming from. But as I said before, we're probably going to put an axle back on this, or a cat back on this, likely a Corsa system, so not too worried about the factory exhaust. But yeah, everything else under the back end here looks great. This car has really fared well the last decade and the last 112,000 miles. So guys, as I said earlier, the brakes all the way around are basically brand new. The tires on this car have a date stamp of 2018. They are getting some dry rot pretty good in them. The tread is still a little usable, but they are getting to the end of life. Now, I would go ahead and put a set of tires on here, but I do not in the least like these factory wheels. So likely we're going to be upgrading wheels and tires here, and we will be going with something a little bit thicker, a little bit wider, so we can put a little bit more meat on the back of this car, because these 215s do not hook worth a darn on this car, even with this minuscule 200 horsepower. If it's raining, I broke the tires loose pretty easily with this thing being automatic. Just driving fairly normally, a little aggressively, I guess. Factory struts, again, nice and dry, no issues there, but factory struts and 112,000 miles. We probably need to look into replacing those and our strut mounts, because if we look up here, our strut mount is starting to show its age, cracking around the center here. So top hat, struts, spring, isolators, probably on the list of things to come in short order. Not knowing the age of the spark plugs, hopefully they replace the spark plugs when they put this engine in. But 75,000 miles, if they did not replace the spark plugs, we're overdue for some spark plugs. So I know a lot of you have been asking for a spark plug video on the BRZ and how to replace it without having to jack up the engine, so that will be coming in the future as well. So real quick, I'll go ahead and show you the condition of the cabin air filter. Like I said, we're going to replace it in another video, but I wanted to show it to you before we get to the video where we replace it. Really easy to get to on this model. Just drop the glove box, and yeah, there's quite a bit of junk in there, so don't want to be breathing that in. So guys, there you have it. This BRZ is in extremely good condition and has held up very well over the last 10 years. It needs very little work to be 100%, which is basically just general maintenance stuff that needs to be caught up on, aside from the repair of that rear wheel bearing hub assembly that we already replaced. So numbers, I bought this car for $9,000. So far, I have put into it, we put in about $473. Now that money got me my 4-wheel alignment, because unfortunately I don't have my own $80,000 alignment machine, so I still had to take it to the Subaru dealership for an alignment. We got a new serpentine belt. We got a cover for the shift interlock on the shifter that was missing, and I don't like having missing pieces on my car, so we got one of those ordered. I bought a fog light kit, which isn't something necessary for this car, but it's a premium, and premiums didn't have fog lights, and I'd like to add the fog lights to this car, so I bought myself a fog light kit, which is about $285. And then I ordered a set of floor mat hooks that pin the floor mat to the floor, because one of them was missing. So not a ton of stuff needed there. And the second batch of parts ordered was today. $74.18, and that got me 3 oil filters, a PCV valve, and the PCV hose. Now, outside of that, we probably need about $200 worth of automatic transmission fluid, filter, and gear oil for the rear differential to get all the surfaces up to date, as the coolant, the oil, brake fluid, all that stuff is good. And that's basically it. There's nothing really else wrong with the car. So again, this is a good testament to Subaru reliability. Even though it's low mileage, it is 10 years old and it is a sports car. And we're basically getting out of it on the cheap, $9,000 purchase price plus maybe about $700 to get everything squared away on it, aside from the tires. But again, we're upgrading the wheels and tires, and we're going to upgrade the exhaust system. And I've actually just talked to my buddies up at Shift Fast Performance in Rock Hill, South Carolina, about a base map tune for this car after slapping a blower on it. So I've talked to them about the feasibility of putting a supercharger on this car with the automatic transmission, and if they can tune it and they have a base map to get me up there where we can dyno tune it, and they said, A-OK, we got you covered. So look for that in the future. We might be strapping a supercharger on this BRZ along with exhaust, wheels, tires, and maybe some visual enhancements to the exterior and interior of it, just depending on how long I keep it around for and how much interest you guys show in the project and the car. With that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you all in the next one.